test designed to provoke an emotional response. Shall we continue? It's a test designed to provoke an emotional response. Shall we continue?
Welcome on in, 5th hour. Glad to see ya. Welcome to the live stream. How we doing? How we doing, people? We're here. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and there's no more econ for a long time, people. We gotta embrace the moment. Your first day of macroeconomics. An important day in your career. Very, very important day in your econ career, people. Momentous day in your career. It's huge for you guys. You guys are going to learn a lot, and your lives will forever be changed. In this moment, you'll never forget the first day you learned about macroeconomics. Unit 2, macro measures coming right at you. We are doing good. Yes. Awesome, people. Welcome on in. No Google Classroom problems today. Only got 21 people in here, though. What's going on with that? Alright. Important announcements to talk about. Oh, I do have actually some really important announcements. I didn't think of a lot of things until 6th hour yesterday. People, I posted this yesterday. We'll talk about Market Watch here in a second, but I posted this yesterday after class. I forgot. Yeah. Actually, I think it was Andrew. I think Andrew reminded me. But anyway, the AP Classroom MCs have been unlocked. And if you don't know how to get to AP Classroom, remember, everything's found in the playlist. People, a lot of you guys keep asking me questions, but everything is in the playlist. So if you go to Week 1 playlist, that's when you were supposed to get on board with AP Classroom. It was Andrew. Yep, he did it. But if you're not in an AP Classroom yet, here I'll put this and then the join code there as well for you guys here. But make sure you guys get on AP Classroom. And people, this is an assignment. You better believe it's an assignment. Now, the AP Classroom multiple choice questions on AP Classroom, why did I say that twice, is graded for completion, right? I think there's 18 multiple choice questions. Try your best on it, and please make sure you do this before the test, obviously, right? It's like a practice test before the actual test. All right, so this thing is due Thursday. You can do it whenever you want after class, right? And the questions are pretty complicated. They're pretty hard, right? You know, I think if you were to get anywhere above a 12 to 13 out of 18, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm pretty happy with that. A 12 out of 18 or a 13 out of 18 in that range, you're doing pretty good. Last rotation, there was a lot of people that got 18, 17, 16. It was crazy, which I'm really excited about, right? So, whole point is, make sure you get on AP Classroom. The link's right there. Most of you guys are already, entered in the class, and knock out those multiple choice questions whenever you can. I put on here though, some students will be like, Mr. Moore, I don't know my results, right? It takes like a minute or two, and then like you just keep refreshing, and all of a sudden, boom, it pops up, and then go to the answers you get wrong, and see if it's the same concept as, if you're getting all the same concept wrong, but then also make sure you look at the correct answer and understand why it is the correct answer. And if you don't understand why it's the correct answer, reach out to me and ask me about it, okay? And then once you do your AP Classroom MCs, you can get on board and do the multiple choice test. Now, I totally forgot about it. I haven't put it up there yet today, but just like this, I'll just make a new post, and I'll give you guys the class code for Go Formative. I'll probably do that between 5th and 6th hour, after this hour, okay? And you guys will have access to the actual test. But please make sure you guys do this one first, and then obviously do the real test afterwards, okay? The real test is due Friday. People, it is like non-negotiable. It has to be something very, very bad, some crazy circumstance for you to not be able to take a test when you've had Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday to complete it. I remember last rotation there was 3 students. It was like on a Monday. They still they never took it, and just goose eggs, right? You get 0 points, right? You had 5 days to do it. What do you mean you forgot about it, right? So it's not like I'm giving you 1 day to take it, and you have so much time to do it. I'm releasing it early, right? So I think you guys should be able to do that, right? So don't forget, AP Classroom C's is graded on completion. Now, if you put all B's, right, and you get like a 4 out of 18, I'm probably not going to give you full points for that. Okay, it has to look like you at least attempted it and tried. Yeah, and then the Unit 1 test is 30 questions, or 33, 35. It's around that. It's a lot of questions. But I think my test is a little bit easier than this one. So again, if you get like a 13 out of 18 on this one, I would suggest you're probably going to at least get like a 25 out of 30. I think you'll do a little bit better on this one. Okay, all right. Other announcements, Market Watch. People, this is the last day for you to make sure your brokerage account is all good to go, right? Whoa, Rohan's in here. How did Rohan get in here? That's pretty sweet. How's Rohan in here? What's up, Rohan? Yeah, you won't have to come to class next week. It'll be sad. I'll miss you guys. But last day to make sure your accounts are good. Gavin's off to a good start, but don't be discouraged. I need to talk to him again. So he just bought a bunch of Tesla stocks, so now he's over. People, starting tomorrow, right? If you have more than 20% holding in one account, you are going to get this removed. And obviously there's going to be assignments in regards to Market Watch, so you're basically forfeiting all assignments on Market Watch. So yeah, like this is no, okay? Has to be less than 20%. So what that means is if you spend all $100,000, you better not have anything more than $20,000 in one particular stock. Who else is in big trouble here? I looked at a lot of these people. Let's look at Carson. Perfect, right? See how this is so good? Now, Carson at some point this week should spend more money, so he has less than 50% liquid, 50,000 liquid. But this is good. Nothing more than 20%. It's close. It's fine. That's not a big deal. All right. So, yeah. Short the VIX. Hold on. Rohan. Hey, people. I don't know if you guys know Rohan. He's kind of a guru. I don't know what you're talking about here. I don't know what you're talking about here. XVZ. Oh gosh. No. All right, people. So, Market Watch, get your account straight. Make sure you go on, take AP class from MCs. Don't forget that. Any other announcements? That's pretty much it. Then we're gonna learn about GDP. But before we learn about GDP, people, I know the Market Watch website's kind of weird. That's why I'm giving you guys this grace period. I know it's weird, but you know, at some point you guys have to be like 20%. All right. Remember, it automatically buys stuff for you this year, which is really weird. But your question of the day is this. Your question of the day, I put it in the chat because it's a long one. I'll probably start doing that anyway. Hold on. I got too many characters. There we go. Boom. There's your question of the day. Question of the day, all right? Because today we're learning about macroeconomics. So this is going to kind of segue into what we want to learn about here, all right? So, it says, imagine you're in a casual conversation with a friend. Your friend asks you, how's the economy doing, right? What would be your response to that, right? What evidence would you use to support your response? No more stimulus, Rohan. No more. I'm not in support of that. No more bailouts. But what would be your response, right? The economy is doing good because this, and that, right? The economy is doing poor because this, and that. All right? So bad because of the coronavirus. What do you mean? What do you mean? Elaborate. What has the coronavirus done? Oh no, people, there's no way this is a copyright Oh no. We gotta switch out of the songs. It's going to like random playlist now. I'm gonna go back to here. I'm gonna get banned from YouTube. Come on, people! Come on! Give me your responses! Oh, people, I forgot my coffee down here. Alright, you guys are putting funny things, but you guys need to put like what would you say? Like, other than like, you know, stirring the pot. Alright? Hey, Rohan, how'd you get the link in here? Who do you know in here? How did you do that? This is supposed to be an unlisted stream. The public doesn't know about it. It's unlisted. Hold on, Rohan says, the economy is amazing, small businesses are collapsing, corporate paper is growing ridiculously fast, credit spreads are increasing, banks are acting more and more risky. I can't agree with you more on that one. Alright, people, let me get some of these responses here. Alright. Bad because of the virus and the president. Bad because of coronavirus. Not great, and I would use the national unemployment rate. National unemployment rate is something I'm looking for here. Very good. Coronavirus made everyone stay home and stop spending as much money. Very good. That's called demand-deficient unemployment, Randa. Very, very good. So lack of revenue, people get laid off, right? Now there's more people unemployed, more lack of revenue, more lack of spending, more people laid off, vicious cycle downwards, right? Virus shutting everything down. The economy is unstable because the pandemic has ruined and closed many small businesses. Yep, and bad business, yep, okay. The economy is coming out of the recession because of the coronavirus. The government has given out subsidies to small businesses and citizens to help boost the economy. They have given out subsidies to small businesses. I think more so bigger corporations than small businesses, but yes, yeah. Bad because of the pandemic and everything being closed down. Bad because of COVID and business shut down, so they can't sell things. People cannot buy, so therefore people aren't working. We already got to Rohan's response. Bad because the coronavirus has, wait, hold on. Every time someone types, it moves. Bad because not as many people are spending money. Very good. Some more people are unemployed. People are unemployed and many businesses are not open. still bouncing back. I like that. Bad because the coronavirus has caused everyone to spend less money. Very good. You guys are all saying the same thing. Now I know that is the right answer, right? But give me something different here. Pandemic has made many slow down, cutting resources. Economy's doing okay. It has gotten a little bit better because we have slowly started getting back to work, and after, very good. It has. The unemployment rate I think at one point was 13%, and it's hard to get an accurate unemployment rate during that time, but I think it's a little bit less. I think it's 7 or 8 right now, which is still high, obviously, but. Trickle-down economy, get that out of here. Not at its highest because of the coronavirus made many people unemployed and the couple months quarantined families just not return to full function. Full employment, yeah. The economy isn't doing so great, good. You're all good, Connor, you're all good. The Rona has taken a toll on the market. Small businesses are getting hit badly. But large firms are benefiting, says Griffin. It's pretty good, it's pretty good. Alright, people. Hey, who's disliking my streams, people? Dang. So hard to please. Alright. Let's get on to what we gotta get on to, alright? Let's learn about GDP, and let's learn about what Unit 2 is going to be all about. Blurry camera. Boom, welcome back. And get on with macroeconomics. Now, people, obviously we're not going to have enough time to assess on Unit 2. We're going to get pretty much 75% of the way with Unit 2, and then when you guys come back, when you return, we'll review it a little bit, and we'll wrap Unit 2 up, and then Unit 3 is my favorite. Unit 3 is going to be my favorite. Alright, so anyway. Let's move on. How's the music today? Matthew, how's the music today? You like it? I tried to find some newer tracks. Alright, people. Macroeconomics, right? Big, large-scale economics is now what we're looking at. We're not looking at the supply and demand for potatoes or bananas or cars or milk anymore. We're going to start looking at the supply and demand for everything by everyone, right? Big time macroeconomics. How do you feel about the 2 Nobel Prize winners? Who are they? Griffin and who are they? I don't know. I feel like generally those are pretty biased. Whoever wins those, and they're not always the best. But okay, anyway, all right. So that was the warm up. All right, and pretty good, right? A lot of you guys said some good things. I'm glad no one said stock market. Stock market's not the greatest indicator of economic health, and a lot of people think it is. Right? It's not. But yeah, unemployment, inflation, GDP. We need to start learning about real macro measures and learning how to measure them as specific measures within GDP and inflation, unemployment. That way we can accurately, conclude if the economy is doing good or doing bad, right? And then ultimately what we're going to do in this class is we're going to learn how to fix it. We're going to learn how to fix the economy, right? We're going to learn how to, what should be done, which never really is done in our land, right? So what is macroeconomics? You already know this. It's a study of large economy as a whole. It's a study of the big picture, right? We're not analyzing one market. We're analyzing all markets added together, okay? So instead of one business, we study all businesses, okay? Why study the whole economy? Well, people, macroeconomics is relatively new, right? I would argue that macroeconomics was born after the Great Depression, right? For a long time, people listened to the words of Adam Smith, which obviously was very influential. He's regarded as the founder of economics when he wrote his book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. But he predominantly argued for a lack of government involvement in the economy. Basically, the idea that leave the markets alone. The invisible hand, you guys remember the invisible hand, right? We talked about that yesterday, actually. And if left alone in the marketplace, businesses and individuals will naturally buy and sell at a quantity and price that is most efficient. No shortages and no surpluses, right? Well, that is very, very true in a lot of ways, but what you'll learn in microeconomics is that not all markets are perfectly competitive, right? And just a lack of macroeconomics was discussed in The Wealth of Nations, right? So later came the Great Depression, obviously, when we experienced massive unemployment in this country, 25% unemployment. 25% of people were looking for work and could not find work. Huge lack of spending, big banking problems, right? just a disaster. The Great Depression, obviously. So John Maynard Keynes, right, basically was like, wow, what is the point of my life, right? I studied economics, and economics, as I know it, basically, we don't do anything, right? What's the point of me knowing how economies work and all these economic measures if we never actually implement policy? We never try to mitigate the business cycle, lessen, the downs and the ups, right? We want to stabilize the business cycle. I know how to do that, right? So let's start measuring the economy. Let's start calculating national unemployment rates and inflation rates and start measuring GDP and all these other measures, right? And let's start, graphing the economy and learning how to fix and implement policy when things are good and when things are bad, right? Take away the punch bowl when things are good, and when things are bad, enact stimulus is basically his general idea, right? So macro is created to, one, measure the economic health, and then later, if the economic health is poor, right, implement policies to fix the economy. John Maynard Keynes has a famous quote. He says, "In the long run, we are all dead." Right? That was his idea, because Adam Smith basically argued, and any sort of classical economist argued, that in the long run, just be patient. In the long run, the economy will self-correct. The economy will fix itself. It might take a while, but if the government does anything, it's just going to cause matters to get worse. Just wait, and things will get better. And John Maynard Keynes said, erroneous, right? In the long run, we're all dead, right? Not waiting 20, 30 years for the economy to self-correct. If we can do things in the here and now with little trade-offs, let's do it. Let's help stabilize the business cycle so we can live in a healthy economy, is basically what he argues. So the whole point I'm trying to say is macroeconomics is relatively a new field of study, right? If you really think about it. Okay, so what we're going to do, it says Unit 2 macro measures. So Unit 2 is all about measuring economic health, right? Thus, so what we're going to try to do is learn about things like GDP, unemployment, and inflation, and identify what are specific measures we can use, what are some problems with those measures, and can we conclude if the economy is good or bad. And then later we're going to learn how to graph it, and then after we learn how to graph the economy, we're going to learn how to fix it. It's the general idea. So I like to use this health analogy when we're studying macroeconomics, right? So think about, there's 3 major diseases, and obviously there's more, but in this class, right, it's macro 202 at Michigan State University. It's pretty basic, right? We're just going to learn about 3 major diseases. We'll talk about other measures actually when we get to Unit 3, but the 3 major diseases we're going to focus on in Unit 2 is slow economic growth, unemployment, and price instability, right? Those are the 3 economic diseases that can plague an economy. So what we need to do in order to, figure out if the disease is actually prevalent, right, we need to have some macro tools. And those tools are, for slow economic growth, we're going to use a measure called real GDP. So first we need to learn about what GDP is, and then after we learn about what GDP is, we're going to learn about what is real GDP, because that's going to be the specific medical equipment needed to identify and diagnose, is there slow economic growth occurring in a country. And then for unemployment, we're going to want to calculate something called the cyclical unemployment rate. We're going to want to calculate the cyclical unemployment rate. So in order to do that, we're going to have to learn first, what is the unemployment rate? How do we get that? What is the net rate of unemployment? What is the amount of unemployment that's going to be healthy and is going to take place naturally? Subtract that, it's going to give us our cyclical unemployment rate, and then from there, we can identify, is there any bad unemployment going on in our country? And if so, right, later we're going to learn how to fix it. And then obviously we're going to want prices to be stable. We don't want inflation to occur. We also don't want deflation to occur. So we need to learn how do we measure prices and track prices changing over time. We're going to use something called the Consumer Price Index, also known as the CPI. So that's what Unit 2 is all about, is trying to figure out these economic diseases. How do we measure these diseases? And then later in Unit 3, we're going to learn how to fix it. We're going to learn how to graph and then fix it. So today, all we want to do is learn about what is GDP, what's the definition of GDP, because from there, we can identify what's included and what's not included in the calculation of GDP, so we can determine if GDP is an accurate measure of standard of living and economic growth. We're also going to learn about the 4 components of GDP. GDP is composed of what? What accounts for most of our goods and services produced domestically in a given country in a given year. All right. So later, when we learn how to fix it, we can identify what's the most important, what's going to have the largest impact on our economy. All right. So there are the 3 goals, and we're going to learn about goal number 1 today and tomorrow. We're going to spend 2 days on GDP because GDP is a pretty big deal. All right. So it says, how does a country measure economic growth? All right. Well, we do so by measuring something called GDP. All right. GDP, people, this is a definition that you need to get tattooed. I got it tattooed on my forearm. That's why I'm always wearing long sleeves, right? I got to stay professional, but I got it tattooed on my forearm here, so I never forget it, right? Because you have to know this definition, right? Because if you don't know the definition, you're not going to be able to know what's included and what's not included in the calculation of the GDP. So it's the dollar value of all final goods and services produced domestically in a given year, right? Domestically. Domestically means like within our borders, right? In a given year. All right, so let's break it down. Dollar value. First of all, our GDP is measured in dollars. It's measured in dollars, right? It's not a simple measure of quantity, right? If we want to measure, like growth and like how much like value the U.S. produces, we're not going to measure just in terms of quantity, right? We're not going to be like, the U.S. produced 15 million things, right? Units of stuff, right? No, right? We want to look at the value of what we produce, right? We could make 15 million Happy Meal toys and our country would probably not be a good place to live, right? Because we're not producing things that actually have high value. That's going to result in high incomes. We want to produce, and we want to measure it, in terms of dollars value, right? We want to produce expensive things, right? Like medical equipment and cars and computers and technology and like iPhones and things like that. High priced, valued items, right? Because if we have a high GDP, a high dollar amount, that probably means we have high incomes. And with high incomes, it probably reflects good things that you would want in a country, right? Access to healthcare, good educational system, right? Things like that. So we want to measure things in a dollar value. So price times quantity is what we're going to use. How much do we produce, and what's the value of what we produce? So we're always going to measure it in dollars. And obviously, if you're looking at GDP for a different country, right, it'd be measured in their currency. And we can convert that into US dollars if we need to. Secondly, we're only going to measure final goods. And the reason is we want an accurate measure of economic health, right? We don't want to double count things. We don't want to count the value of the cars or the value of the tires that Ford buys from like Goodyear and then also count the value of the car because we're going to double count those tires, right? We only want to count the value of the car. The value of the car is going to account for the value of the tires, the value of the radio, the value of the speakers, the value of everything else in the car. We don't want to count intermediate goods that are like, composed of the final good. We want to measure the final good itself, okay? We want to measure the value of the house, not the door, the windows, and everything else. And then also measure the value of the house, right? We just want to measure the final good itself. We don't want to have any sort of double counting whatsoever. Another part of our GDP is we want to measure in 1 year. In other words, we're not going to include used goods, right? If you go out and buy a good that was produced in the year 2018, it's not going to be counted in the 2020 GDP because it was already counted in 2018. We want to see what is produced this year, right? Not what has been produced, what's going to be produced this year. So, January 1st to January 1st, right? This given year. And last but not least, we're going to measure, we're only going to count goods that are produced within our country, right? Because if goods are produced in our country, our people are probably working on those goods. And if our people are working on those goods in our country, that results in incomes. And that's what we really want to measure in our country. We don't care if a U.S.-made company is producing things in Tokyo. If a U.S. company is producing things in Tokyo, that would not change the U.S. GDP because it's not within our borders. That would, however, change the GNP, gross national product. Gross national product is U.S. companies. Gross domestic product, doesn't matter who the company is, we're measuring, producers in the U.S., like located within the borders in the U.S., okay? So if you know the definition of GDP and all four of those little components there, you're going to be able to identify what's included and what's not included in GDP. So what else is not included? We already talked about intermediate goods. They're not included. We haven't talked about this yet, though. What is not included in GDP? Non-productive transactions, right? So if you get a question, right, and it says, is this included or is this not included, right? And you're like, I'm not sure. Ask yourself, was this a good or service produced, right? So for example, like stocks. Is a stock a good or service produced, right? If Griffin, goes online and makes $100 by buying McDonald's stock today, right? is that something that's produced? No, right? He's just buying shares of a company, and then he's selling his shares of a company for a profit. Nothing was produced, not a good, not a service, right? So we're not going to count, profit made from stocks, people's money made from buying bonds. We're not going to count real estate, like land, right? If someone sells their land in Florida to someone else, right, that was already there. It was not produced, right? So we're not going to count that. Now, be careful, right? If you see the word stocks, it doesn't automatically mean that we're not going to count that. If it says someone made $40,000 this year by giving, stock advice, right, commission, we're going to include that because that is a service that that person is providing, right? Stock advice, like a stock broker, right? So if it's a good or a service, it is counted. If it's not, obviously it's not going to be included. We're obviously not going to count used goods. We talked about that already. Then obviously we're not going to count anything on the black market, right? We're not going to count things that are illegal that are obviously produced and then obviously sold, right? If it's an illegal good, right? Because obviously the U.S. has no means of tracking those goods, and obviously we don't want these goods to be counted because with the high GDP, we're going to conclude that this is a good nation to live in. So if most of our GDP is drugs and things like that, right? We're not going to want to count that, obviously. Okay. All right. So it says, what is the most American-made car you could purchase, right? Because that's what we want to look at GDP. We don't care who makes it. We only care where it's made, right? When we calculate GDP. So what is the most American-made car you could purchase? A lot of you guys would be like Ford, Chevy, right? And you get the big bumper stickers on your tailgates and be like, buy American, right? If you buy foreign, you can get out, right? Well, most foreign makers produce cars mostly in the U.S., right? So it just so happens this year actually is the Ford Ranger, and actually is made predominantly in Michigan. Jeep is made in Illinois, but generally it has been ever since I've taught this course. Honda and Toyota, which Toyota doesn't make the top 10 this year, but usually they do, have made the most American-made cars, right? Which is pretty crazy, right? So the whole buy foreign and buy American thing is kind of is outrageous, right? This is a better reflection. So Jeep recently has been the most American-made car you can possibly buy. The Jeep has been, but for a long time it was like Toyota, it was Honda, right? Just where are the most value made in terms of the car? Most of that value is produced here in the U.S., which is pretty cool. All right, so remember that. Remember that. It's all about where it's made, not who makes it. Okay. All right. So there's two ways to calculate GDP, people. There's two ways. There's the expenditure approach, and there's the income approach. Now, in this class, we're basically only going to use the expenditures approach. All right. So many countries take advantage of foreign labor. Comparative advantage, right? The idea of comparative advantage, right? A lot of countries, or companies produce elsewhere, right? If you think about the most American-made names, they're not American-made. Like Heinz, is not American, right? Just any American-made company, most of them are now owned by foreigners, right? And they're made in foreign land, which is crazy. So. But yeah, we're predominantly going to use the expenditures approach in this class. Now, you need to know of the income approach. You need to know the idea of the income approach. But we're going to be working with the expenditures approach in this class. So it says, how do we calculate GDP? Well, one way of doing it, because we want to get the market value of all final goods and services produced domestically in a given year, is we add up spending, right? Because if we add up the total amount spent, right, we can get that market value number, right? So if I go buy, $300 worth of final goods and services produced domestically in a given year, and then Griffin goes out and buys X amount of dollars, we add up all that total spending, add it all up, and the aggregate number, the total number would equal our GDP, right? If I buy a t-shirt for $10 and that t-shirt was produced domestically this year, that's the market value of that t-shirt, and we're going to add that to GDP as long as it meets those requirements. So adding up total spending is how we get GDP, because what's spent would reflect the market value, and that's what we need. We want to measure it in dollars. The income approach would also work, right? Because think about it. If, say, we spend $1 billion on final goods and services produced domestically in a given year, another way of getting to $1 billion is we add up all income generated from those very goods, right? If I spend $10 on a t-shirt produced domestically in a given year, the maker of that t-shirt is going to get paid $10, right? So all total spending on these goods should equal all income on these goods. When you spend money, it turns into revenue, which turns into income for somebody else. So either way, adding up total spending or adding up total income would generate that total number of GDP. But again, it has to be the goods that we're looking at. It's not just all spending in the U.S. It's not all income made in the U.S. It has to be from the goods produced domestically within a given year. Okay? So adding up how much was spent on goods and services and how much was earned should generate the same number. All right, so let's further look at the expenditure approach, what we're going to be using the most in this class. So it says there's 4 components of GDP, and we're looking at expenditures, right? So what? Because expenditures mean spending, right? So who spends money in an economy? Who buys things in an economy, right? Well, the first person that could buy something in the economy is consumers, me and you, right? Buying Subway sandwiches, buying T-shirts, buying, toiletries, right? Buying whatever, right? Consumers account for the majority of our GDP. Just everyday consumer spending accounts for almost 70% of the U.S. GDP. A lot, right? Just simple everyday items, like cars and things like that. It's not really an everyday item, right? It's pretty much a purchase and you use it for 6 years or more. But consumer spending is the biggest portion of our GDP. So later on, when we talk about what can we do to fix the economy, I would argue, as many would argue, right? More so a demand side economist would argue that we need to increase consumption, right? We need to increase consumption, right? So when coronavirus hit, right, I would argue the most effective policy that we could have done was do things to boost consumer spending, right? Now, everyone did get a check for $600 or so, right? But I think if we would have gave consumers more money, that would have caused a greater positive impact on our economy, right? So there's kind of this demand side economics and supply side economics, right? You give money to producers in the hopes that they're gonna hire workers, right? And then they hire workers and give them high wages, and then they have high wages, and they're gonna go out and go buy goods, or you can give money directly to consumers, and they're gonna go buy goods, right? And if they buy goods, more revenue, more employment, right? There's 2 ways to kind of get there, right? There's 2 different ways, people, demand side or supply side. But we're gonna wait and hold off on that debate at a later time. But I'm just saying consumers account for the biggest portion of our GDP. All right. Number 2, who else can buy goods? Well, consumers buy goods. Who else can purchase goods in our economy? Investment, right? Businesses. Remember how big of a word I told you guys this was? Like on day 3 of class, I said investment is a huge word. When you hear the word investment in macroeconomics, always be thinking about businesses. Businesses spending money on capital goods, machines, tools, and equipment, right? And businesses do that, right? Businesses buy self-checkout machines. They buy new storefronts. They buy new warehouses. They buy new forklifts. They buy new containers. They buy new tools, right? So we're going to try to account for investment. I think investment is like 10 to 15% of our GDP, right? Businesses spending money on capital goods. So we got consumers buying things, add up all that. Businesses buying things, add up all that. Who else can buy something in the economy, which can equate to our total expenditures in a given year? The government, right? The government buys a lot of things. The government spends a lot of money, and at least in our country, on national defense, right? So all the money spent on tanks and bullets and armor and things like that, right? All the money spent on building roads and hiring contractors to fix public goods like roads and infrastructure and bridges and things like that. All the money spent on public schools, right? All the money spent on, what else does government buy? It's like a big ticket item. I don't know. But it can't be transfer payments, right? We're not going to add government spending money on things that aren't productive, right? Ask yourself this: if government spends money on something, and the way they and that comes from like tax revenue, and they're simply just giving tax revenue back, they're redistributing income, that's not going to be counted. It has to be government spending money, generally using tax revenue or deficit spending, on goods and services, right? Building a bridge, building a road, bullets, right? Schools, right? A good or a service. If the government spends money on welfare, food stamps, bridge cards, subsidies, right? What else? Those are called transfer payments. And I think we've talked about transfer payments already. That's whenever you tax somebody and you reallocate it to somebody else, right? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, we're not counting any of that spending. If it's simply taking money from some and then giving it to somebody else, that's not a good or service being produced. That's just simply redistributing income, which I think is very important, right? Don't get me wrong. We're just not going to count that in terms of GDP because we want to count goods and services being produced. Yeah, Rohan, UBI is pretty cool. UBI is pretty cool. I'm in support of UBI. I think we should test it. I think it's being tested in Quebec or something like that. It's being tested in like a local area, and then obviously some country's going to adopt it nationwide. And I think when a country adopts UBI nationwide, I think it's going to be a success. But I mean, you got to try it, right? You got to try it. You got to try it. All right. Anyway, he's talking about universal basic income, but. Okay, anyway, next up, net exports. Net exports is simply exports minus imports. So consumers buy goods, businesses buy goods, government buys goods, and foreigners buy U.S. goods. So to get the total amount that foreigners buy of our goods, we need to do exports minus imports. What is the difference between what foreigners are buying from us and what we're buying from them? Right? Obviously, if that's a positive number, that means foreigners are buying more of our stuff than we're buying from them. That means exports would be greater than imports. All right, so we're going to do exports minus imports. So a lot of students write like X minus M or NX, right? Or XM, right? However you want to write it, net exports. It has to be the difference between what people buy from us and what we buy from them. And in our country, we're generally in a trade deficit. So we're going to have a negative number for net exports. Americans generally buy more goods overseas. Amazon and things like that, right? Then foreigners buy from us, right? So the whole point is GDP. People buy more goods from overseas than they buy from us, right? Our GDP is negative for net exports. IMF is getting behind it, really? In Quebec, did you say it was tried in Quebec? I don't know. All right, so there you go. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus X N, or X minus M, right? Again, this is on my left forearm, right? On left forearm right here. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus XN. Please make sure you know that. What are the four components of GDP? GDP is composed of what? Consumers buying things, businesses buying things, governments buying things, and foreigners buying things. Okay? All right, moving on. So, what's included, not included in GDP? All right. $10 for a movie ticket at NCG Cinema. That would be included, assuming that it was a movie ticket like this year. That'd be included. $5 million increase in U.S. defense expenditures. Included, right? So now we're at $5 million and $10. $45 for a used economics textbook. No, it's used. Used goods are not counted. We're not going to count that. Ford makes $2 million factory in Michigan. Included, and that's investment. So we got investment, we got government spending, we got consumer spending. I'm kind of just doing this. We just do this in class, but I'm going to do it for us. $20,000 Toyota made and sold in Mexico, not included because it was made in Mexico, right? It's not made in the U.S. $10,000 profit from selling stocks, not included. It's a non-productive transaction. $15,000 truck made in the U.S. and sold in Canada, included. And it would be in addition to our GDP because we made it and it was sold in Canada. So that would increase our GDP. $10,000 tuition to attend college, that is included. And that's consumer spending. It's not investment. It's consumer spending. $120 Social Security payment to Pete, not included. Right? It seems like a government service, but it's not a productive transaction. We're just reallocating money. We're redistributing money from one person to the other. That's a transfer payment, and transfer payments are not included. A farmer buys a $100,000 tractor. That's included, but that is investment. It's not consumer spending. That's an investment. That is a business, a farmer, buying machines and tools, a tractor. Okay? So add that whole number up, and that would equal our GDP. In that case, it was $7,125,010. That's how we get GDP. Total spending on goods and services produced domestically in a given year. Add it all up. That's our GDP. So here's a real life FRQ. Now this was asked a long time ago, probably in 2006. I would reckon here. It says the value of a used textbook in 2006. No, so you'd write no, not included, because it's used, right? tractors are really expensive. No, I don't think it's an inflated number. Rent paid in 2006 by an apartment building built in 2000. Well, we're not going to include the apartment building because that was built in 2000, but we are going to include the rent in 2006. Why? Because that is a service, right? That is a service, so we're going to count the rent. Commissions earned by a stockbroker, we're going to include that, right? Because that's a service being provided in the year we're looking at, 2006. The value of automobiles produced in 2006 in South Korea by a firm owned by the U.S., like Ford making cars in South Korea, not included. It's not made in the U.S., right? Look how pretty the colors are. Okay. Where's my answer to that? No? And people, I'm not going to go through these multiple choice questions, but you're going to have a copy of these on the notes, right? So, generally there's like 4 to 5 multiple choice questions on every set of notes. Make sure you look at those. It's going to help you out. All right. So what does GDP tell us, right? Like, why do we use GDP? What does it mean, right? If the GDP is, 7 million, like you saw there, okay, what is that? Who cares, right? What is that number trying to tell us? Well, we use that number for a few reasons, right? One way we use it is we see, did our GDP go up from last year to this year, right? Did we implement some sort of policy that has worked, right? If we try something, like we were just talking about, universal basic income, right? If everyone gets cut a $2,000 check, once a year, once a month, whatever, right? Does our GDP go up? And if our GDP goes up, then maybe that policy is good, right? Maybe that policy works. If it goes down, maybe that policy does not work, right? Things like that, okay? That's why we use GDP. To look at, did things work or did they not work, right? Are we better off? We're trying this method of fiscal policy or monetary policy or whatever, and this country's using this means of policy to navigate their recession. Which country has a higher GDP? Who's doing it better? Which policy has worked comparing to multiple different countries? All right. So it says which 15 countries had the highest GDP? 2019. 3 different sources here. The U.S. has the highest GDP in the world, and at some point in my career, it's probably not going to be the case. But this is my 7th year teaching, and it has always been the U.S. The U.S. has the largest economy in the world, because we produce a whole heck of a lot of goods, and the goods that we do produce are pretty expensive. They're pretty high valued ticket items. I think our largest exporter is refined oil. Which obviously is a big ticket item. Airplanes, things like that. Yeah, I just looked at the most expensive tractor. No, I'm talking about like an industrial tractor, like a big tractor, like one that's like huge. And you're plowing all sorts of land, Matthew. Rip the EU. Rohan, you're getting these guys off track here. All right? Yeah, I know. I can tell you missed the econ, Rohan. Hey, you better not be skipping your class, though, to be in my class. You're going to get me in trouble, okay? All right, anyway. So, okay, who else has high GDP? China, right? Japan has a very high GDP, which is crazy, right? If you guys look at all these countries, what would you say? What would you say is common between all these countries? No, you're good, Rohan. Actually, I like it. I'm messing with you, but make sure you're not skipping class. All right. All these countries are relatively big, right? They're relatively big, and they're relatively developed countries. They're countries that aren't producing agriculture. They're countries that aren't just like big manufacturing. They're countries that are producing, like I said, cars, medical equipment, service sector, industries, things like that. All right. They're producing big items, whether it's a good or a service. But yeah, Japan's up there. Japan's pretty crazy because Japan's a pretty small country. Germany, in the grand scheme of things, is a pretty small country. All right. So in terms of GDP per capita, GDP per person, Japan and Germany is up there, right? They're considered first world. Yeah, they're old, right? They're old. You guys ever hear the terms like first world, second world, third world countries, right? We used to call it, first world, third world. Now it's developed, developing, and least developed, right? It's more like is the terms we use now. What is the EU? Why? Oh yeah. Well, the EU is not a country, and they just wanted to put that up there as like a measure of what would everyone in the EU. It's still less than the U.S., but the EU is not a country. That's why I didn't rank them. I didn't rank them there. All right. So again, how big is the U.S. economy? Because obviously we're going to be focused on the U.S., right? Obviously this class is in the U.S., but the U.S. is huge, right? If you look at where are things made in the world, U.S., Europe, and Asia predominantly, right? And then this is a really cool map, and this one's pretty new, 2019. I had to update it from last year. So what is the state equivalent to a country in the rest of the world in terms of GDP, right? Michigan is pretty close to the entire country of Austria, right? Which, Austria produces some big ticket items, right? A developed nation. Look at Texas. Texas as the economy equivalent to Canada. That's pretty remarkable, right? California is so big, it's the economy of the UK. Not England, the UK, right? That's pretty crazy. Texas could really be its own country. California could really be its own country. Most of these states could be their own country, right? The U.S. is huge, and it's very different, right? If you were to travel to the U.S., just culturally alone. Look at Florida is the economy the size of Mexico, right? Which is pretty crazy, right? And obviously it's more tourism than anything in Florida, and it's the size of Mexico. North Carolina is Belgium, right? Insane. What are some other crazy ones here? I mean, Colorado's Israel, right? Illinois is Netherlands. That's pretty crazy. New York is South Korea, and South Korea produces a lot of items, right? Yeah, I mean, it's great. Maine's Panama. Even our states that don't produce a whole lot, right? Montana's Ghana, right? Lebanon, North Dakota, South Dakota, Lithuania, right? Pretty crazy. So it's a really cool map. The U.S. is huge, and the U.S. produces a lot of stuff. We have the largest economy in the world, and probably will for a long time. I mean, look at Virginia's Argentina, right? Pretty crazy. Okay, so this is more, right? So how come when some people say, or they tout that, the U.S. has a high GDP, this country must be awesome to live in, right? Actually, you know what? I think we'll stop right there, people. I think we'll stop right there. I think this would be a good point to pick up tomorrow. Okay, so because what I want to talk about is GDP like a good measure of standard of living, and why is it also not a good measure of standard of living, right? Why should we not always be like, yeah, the GDP is high, so that means our country's great to live in, right? We must not have any sort of problems if our GDP is high, right? So we'll talk about that tomorrow. So today you have enough to do your problem set. So I'll post the problem set. I'll see you guys in Google Meet here in 12 minutes. You can take a break if you want it, but pop in there. The problem set's very short today, and I'll see you guys here in a second. No. I want to see you guys. I don't want to do just the Google Classroom or the YouTube Live thing. I want to go to Google Meet at some point. So I'll see you guys shortly. All right. And Rohan, I'll give